So I've tried to do press-on nails, and 2 of them won't stick. So just run with that. I am bad at literally everything. Sup nerds, welcome back to my channel. My name's Maddie if you're new here, and I hope you're doing better than I am. Welcome back to my torture chamber. Views are down, so that means I have to do something point blank stupid and masochistic. And I decided that because I'm working on currently a larger project, that I would do something that I thought would take less time. This video, I'm sure, is abhorrently long, so that was not the right plan on my part. But I read Hunting Adeline because Hunting Adeline is the most popular video on my channel, and I kind of just don't like the fact that, like, it's only a duology and I might as well just finish the rest of it. But we have so much to talk about with this book, so let's just jump right into it, shall we? To start off, Hunting Adeline is boring. Which, considering it's like the most infamous book in book talk history, I wasn't expecting that. This book series was considered so taboo, so f***ed up, and it was also banned for some of the subject matter. But to be honest, the first 300 pages of it is mediocre torture, and the last 200 pages is just if Hardin and Tessa from After got tattoos and were a little bit edgier. As I said, I have a lot to talk about when it comes to this book, regardless of it being as over the top as I was expecting. But I'm just gonna say I had high expectations, and this book honestly wasn't as like crazy as any of the grimdark fantasies that I've read, and really didn't even scratch the surface of the extreme horror books that I've read. Honestly, if you're looking for like a good horror read Mayfly. This is fucked up and somehow incredibly romantic and like interesting, and oh, by the way, well written. It's almost like books these days have to be written like a toddler drawing on the wall with their own feces to be popular. Now, before I fully get onto my old man yells at clouds soapbox, let's go ahead and go over the plotline of Hunting Adeline. If I'm also really cranky during this, it's because it's like the first day of my period and I'm cramping very badly. So if I'm very mean in this, that's why. If you watched the last video on Hunting Adeline, which I recommend you do because I'm not going back to explain the premise of this entire series, you would know that the main character was kidnapped at the end of the last book. Our heroine Adeline wakes up after a pretty bad car accident to a doctor tending her injuries. Pretty quickly, the tone of this book just doesn't match the situations that are happening on the page. She talks about how she doesn't belong in this fucked up salad of a situation, and that she deserves to be in a nice salad full of vegetables and shit. Initially, there's a few scenes between Addie and the doctor, and it seems like the doctor might actually care about the fact that she is about to be basically sold as this high commodity because she's Zade's girlfriend, and apparently everyone in this dark underworld knows who he is and who she is and how vastly important she is because of being his girlfriend. But because this doctor is a man, he tries to kidnap her for himself, and he is also a predator. Because there's no nuance in these books at all. If you are a man and not the love interest, you are a bad person, if not just a sexual deviant of some kind. This is also where we start seeing a lot of the inconsistencies with Addie's character from the last book. In the last book, if you remember, she was deemed the manipulator because she's an author, and authors manipulate people's emotions, which, like, okay. This book, Addie is referred to as the Diamond, and no, I don't think that this book came out when Bridgerton was as popular as it is, but it basically refers to the fact that Addie is like the white whale of trafficked women. Apparently, she is absolutely so stunning. Every man wants to fall for her. Every man wants to purchase her. It is insane how crazy she's described in the eyes of these people, when in the last book, I'm pretty sure she was described as pretty mediocre looking. Not necessarily like ugly, but like she wasn't described as like this show-stopping piece of meat, basically. Which is, to me, a wild way to create a wish fulfillment character. I'll leave the discussion about the elements of this book way down in the line of the video, but I'll put it very clear. This book is a romanticized SA fantasy. Being very cautious about what I can say here. I don't want YouTube to just come in and strike me down, but if you have an interest in actually discussing this topic, please do. But I'd like to remind the audience, if you engage, like, dislike, leave hate comments, you are giving me more money. just so you know. Moving on with the plot line, Doc here that was helping out Addie does in fact get murked. I don't actually remember who kills him. Then Addie is handed off to Francesca, who introduces herself to Addie as Addie's new madame. Francesca is a strange character to say the least. She is a bad guy, so she can't have any redeeming qualities ever, but honestly her two personality traits are that she wears heels and is skinny. That's about it. I will talk more on her later. Jessica has a brother Rocco, who I will also discuss later, but he is basically her antithesis. He is ugly, fat, and has fucked up teeth. He is also incredibly evil. And then there's Sydney. She's one of the girls in the house that Addie thinks might be someone that could be a support system, like a comrade in arms. But the thing about Sydney is that she's kind of pretty. She also has fucked up teeth, and she's an asshole. When it comes down to the way that this book describes living in trafficking, Addie has no self-preservation skills at all. He, on the other hand, actually utilizes whatever she can to stop herself from moving along in the process of what is this fantastical version of trafficking. This includes misbehaving, hurting herself or other women in the house, and just in general causing mayhem because she's unpredictable. She cannot move along to get sold. This could be considered a tactic. It also works, but despite that fact, Addie views Sydney, not the other people in the house that have kidnapped her and held her against her will, as the antagonist. Sydney is the antagonist in a lot of this part of the book. Just comes across like Addie is like the not like other girls of being trafficked. Picking up where I say tone is a problem in this series. So as I said, there's a process for how these people are being prepared to be sold. There's this very strange Katniss Everdeen moment where they're given bows and arrows and then they're being hunted for sport. At one point, Addie refers to the people that buy these women as too ugly to get pussy, but they're also the richest, most attractive men in the world and they can get any woman they want. The fact that like page to page things just can't remain consistent in books like these, it drives me up the fucking wall. On that note of consistency, Addie has a wound on her back from the car accident that just kind of hangs around for days and days and days, and she ends up reopening it a lot because she's being abused. And despite the fact that the madame says that she's going to protect Addie because she's the diamond, that doesn't happen, and she is brutally essayed despite that situation. The context in this just doesn't make sense. On top of that, when Addie first arrives, Francesca's like, we gotta get her ready, we gotta get her out of here, we gotta sell her so that we can make the most money. And then Addie's in the house for 2 fucking months. We do find out later that Francesca may have been like delaying the sale because she was letting the guy that was going to purchase Addie just R-word her whenever he wanted. But that just doesn't necessarily make any sense because it just doesn't. Also, it happens off page because most of what happens on this book happens off page. Regardless of the reasoning for the delay, a bunch of stuff happens in that 2-month period that we do not see. It's just a time skip. We just jump it. And then for the rest of the book, we keep referencing things that happened to Addie in that 2-month period. But since it's happening after the fact, and none of it seems to have had an in-the-moment effect on her that we actually got to see, it doesn't really feel weighted to the audience. And it just kind of goes back into the fact this is just a totally obliviously unedited fantasy in a lot of ways. Me, especially when it comes to indie published works, when things come up later on in the story that are being retconned that weren't included as scenes in the previous part of the book, it just indicates to me that this is a newer writer, not necessarily a bad writer, but someone who really should have had actual editors rather than their friends reread their work for them. But that would have taken work, and that's not what we're here for. What has Zade been doing, you might ask? He's been torturing people. Doesn't even find Addie with his Batman level fuckery. He ends up just buying sex slaves, and then one of them tells him where she is. But for the first 250 pages, he's just killing people and carving roses into his chest because he's so angry. So Addie survives the culling, as they called it, which is so lazy, I don't give a fuck. And then she and Sydney are always at each other's throats, mostly because I think Sydney is the only character that just can't instantly kill Addie, so there had to be an antagonist that Addie could, like, interact with. Throughout this part of the book, there are journal excerpts from this girl named Molly, who apparently has her own novella. I did not read it. I have no interest in it. I just think that if you include anything in your novel, you should have some kind of tie up to that storyline. We have no idea what happened to Molly, and she just has these journal entries that make no sense, and then all of a sudden Addie starts putting in journal entries. And this girl is supposed to be such a popular author that she can live anywhere she wants to in the United States, but if these are the journal entries that she's writing, I can't imagine she could write herself out of a cracker box. Like, they're badly written, and they are only in the story so that the author didn't have to go and actually write horrific scenes. She can just have a journal entry as the topic of the next chapter. It's so bamboozlingly stupid to me. But the thing about the journal is that it does provide our heroine a handy dandy pen, which she uses to murder Sydney with. Shut up, YouTube. They were friends and they lived happily ever after. You don't have to listen to that part. Now look, I am not an expert on the modern trafficking world at large, and I don't want to be. That is not something I have any interest in becoming, like, an expert on. I do know from being a general horror reader fan that giving someone who is trafficked and any kind of object that could be used as a weapon is probably a no-go. So either these are the worst traffickers that have ever existed ever, or H.D. Carlton didn't put any effort into establishing an escape path for her main character, because to be honest, the reality of this being 200 pages long, this segment at least, is exactly what the author said in her review of the book, where she just wanted her characters to suffer in shock value ways and had no indication of how to resolve those problems in ways that thematically made sense for the horrific acts she was including in her book as perverted enjoyment. Yeah, that's a little harsh. It's a little harsh. Some help from a character that I'm going to talk about later. Addie ends up escaping with adding a couple kill counts to her growing number on top of Sydney. She also rips out a tracking device in her arm, which at least she remembered that, because another part of the book, she seemed to have forgotten about that shit completely. She ends up running around the property that this house is on that she's been living in, and then ends up finding an abandoned trailer and talking to some squirrels and hallucinating a bit and then passing out, because that definitely resolved the situation. But good thing for us, our hero in prison issue armor, yes, I'm reusing that joke, please don't shank me, like sue me, except shank because it's prison and also I can't afford to be sued. He shows up and saves the day. Yay! They're reunited. We're so happy. I'm gonna shoot myself. But that's the thing about this book that grinds my gears the most. Addie never lost faith in her stalker. Remember? It's a stalker romance, remember? She never lost faith that Zade was going to show up for her. She never had any moment of ever thinking that she was not going to get out alive and go on a merry murder band craze with her absolute fucked up soulmate. We never once had any indication that either of these characters were ever in danger. So taking the horrific acts that take place in this book seriously is just kind of hard to imagine. This book just entertains people with little to no critical thinking skills and then paints narratives around men, especially men of color, the people who are not conventionally attractive, and the mentally ill. Also gay people. Like, not a single marginality seems to be left out of the weirdness that is this book. I'm getting ahead of myself. Yay! Addie's been rescued, and as I said, he didn't do any fucking detective work to find her. The author just stopped faffing about and led his ass right to her. Regardless, we went from one wildly uncomfortable section of the book to the next wildly uncomfortable section of the book, which I will now dub Hardin and Tessa should have just done drugs. Which, unless you've read or watched some kind of after-related content, that's not going to make sense to you, but it's hilarious to me. So Zade brings Addie back to her manor in Seattle, which, by the way, she affords by being this crazy author, press X to doubt. There she recovers after being kidnapped, sexually assaulted, mentally and physically abused, and more. Zade makes it about himself so fucking fast. There is this stretch where he does kind of say that he'll give her space while she heals, but that shit lasts like maybe 15 minutes, and then he's all up in her business like immediately. Actually, her disappearance made the news. She's like a well-known public figure, and despite that fact, the police never question her ever about her whereabouts or what happened. Which, like, ACAP, but at the same time, SPD is nosy as hell. There is no way a public figure goes missing and is known to be missing, and they wouldn't ask questions. Like, that's not how this works. And we also never even see Addie interact with any of her editors or like anybody who expects books. Like, we don't know anything she writes. We know nothing about Addie other than the fact that she has been stalked by a fucking nightmare of a person. There is no personality traits other than I write books, but we don't know what those books are. We don't know who she works with. Here's another thing about the segment of this book that doesn't make sense. Zade has Shmoney. Man is loaded to the tune of has a Neverland ranch where he puts all of the people he purchased, rescued, money.
You not getting money.
So why on earth does his girlfriend go to a public clinic to get an STD and pregnancy test done? Why does she have to go through that kind of experience? This is a pretty harrowing part of the book, as I can only imagine anyone who has had any type of sexual health testing done. It can be very uncomfortable, regardless if you're going after you've been traumatized or not. Addie is very concerned that she may have been infected by some of the men that were hurting her throughout this experience, or dare yet impregnated. But all of this fear is more towards what Zade will think of her and her body if something happened. She even says oh, this man would never want to raise my rapist's child. Additionally, despite the madame supposedly making the men wear condoms, that apparently is something that wasn't necessarily happening, that we hear retconned later. And then on top of that, she also has an IUD that is a huge plot point coming up, but we seem to not necessarily remember that exists when she's doing this particular situation. There's so many inconsistencies, it drives me nuts. Regardless of those inconsistencies, Addie is going through it emotionally. I also don't love the fact that this is a representation of making STDs out to be dirty. That is not an okay assumption, and especially in this particular situation, when this is a BDSM themed book, and in that culture, viewing STDs as dirty is a absolute fucking no-no. And there is ways to make sure that your sexual health is protected, and disclosing it is important. And I find it just so frustrating when dark romances make out that to be kind of the kink that STDs are. It's so, that's a whole topic, but I don't like how this book handled it. And it's just really frustrating. Healing from a trauma like this does look different for everyone, and I do think that the book at least attempted to handle it in a better direction, but the way that it was executed was clear to me that no care was handled in these incredibly intense topics. And it also indicates to me that even if kink was explored in this book, it was done at the harm of the people that do actually utilize some of these dynamics. Honestly, this part of the book is where things started to feel exceptionally stale. And maybe that's because even attempting to give these two kind of this bubble of time kind of just felt disingenuous for the storyline. You had your main love interest R-word the main character with a pow pow, and now we're just kind of being a normal relationship and healing from trauma. What is happening here? Because we have 200 more pages of the book and we can't have our lovebirds happy for long, let's go marching on into fucking craziness. Zade mentions in this part of the book that he would pop ingrown hairs on Addie's lady bits, and they say romance is dead. Speaking of romance, let's talk about Sibby. If you don't remember, Sibby is a random character that shows up in the first book and then makes a mess and leaves. She does that in this book, but she's around for a lot longer and she's still as irrelevant, and oh my god, I don't like this character at all. I know she has her own novella. I did not read it for this video. I think it's funnier to just be like, where did you come from? Why are you here? Because that is the entirety of this character. She's annoying and unnecessary in the last book, and somehow they managed to dial it up to 11 in this book. Sibby's character to me just feels like a foil for Addie, because Sibby clearly has a very destructive background, but she seems to be the foil to Addie because she needs to be crazier and make Addie look unbroken despite Addie's trauma. Sibby basically gets dumped on Addie to live with her, even though, once again, let me remind you, we have an entire Jonestown for her to live in that Zade owns, so I don't know why on earth this random character that Addie pretends to be friends with has to stay with her. She could also, I don't know, go to a place for mentally ill people who hallucinate imaginary bodyguards and then have sex with them while people are around. But instead, this character who is clearly mentally ill and needs psychiatric care is played for laughs. Her characterization is almost like your friend's friend whose dog is going into heat and humping everything that moves, and they seem to think that it's just cute and funny, whereas it's actually just irresponsible and awkward. Once again, this is supposed to be a human being, and as I said, Addie pretends to be friends with her. It's giving Mean Girl. It's giving ableism. It's giving over-sexualization of mentally ill women. On top of that, it has the audacity to be unoriginal. This character is just Harley Quinn. Was having Batman not enough? So some hijinks ensue, and they send Sibby in to infiltrate a club, and she gets recognized as being a fucking famous serial killer, which I'm like, Who's thinking up here? What are we thinking about? I don't understand. Then there's a car chase scene, and Carlton actually gets something right about Seattle for once, where she mentions the traffic is absolutely awful, and they somehow still get away, so she loses points immediately. Like, I'm not even sure Carlton has ever spent any time in Seattle, because she just kind of refers to it as the Seattle. But her author bio says that she lives in Ohio, and we all know that's not a real place, so I digress. During the car chase scene, Addie gets horny, and at this point her and Zade haven't really been touching, by the way, and she's getting excited, and Sibby's in the car and is also getting excited, which just gross, guys. Once they get back to Addie's house, they kick Sibby out of the car and start canoodling like you do. The tension in this scene is probably the only time that there is any sex scene that I actually felt interested in reading, and it was solely built up and then kind of just blown over and destroyed later on because, like, the trauma that Addie faced, like, apparently is healed by Zade's magic dick in, like, 2 seconds. But because the sex scene is consensual, we have to get back to fighting between the main characters, because otherwise there is absolutely no reason to be reading this book, apparently. But what are they fighting about? Well, for most of this plotline, they're fighting about whose fault it was that Addie got kidnapped. And I know the answer to this. Do you know the answer to this? Leave the answer down below in the comments as to whose fault it is Addie got kidnapped. Say it with me now. Zade. It's Zade's fault. But for some reason, the rest of the book is trying to convince you that it's not. Somehow, because Zade is just a guy in the world, and there are people that want to kidnap people, it's not his fault, apparently. The mental gymnastics that go into liking this book, I just don't get it. You guys should be winning Olympic golds and making Simone Biles' husband go on podcasts or something. It's fucking wild. So because Addie is a dum-dum and likes to do things that would just put her in absolute harm's way, she decides that she wants to be involved in punishing the people that kidnapped her. She gets these training scenes and she has to get buff and strong. Okay, Elena Gilbert. The first excursion she goes on is a sex party where she is going to be able to infiltrate and hunt down the man that was going to purchase her, who did assault her several times. Addie gets all dolled up and puts on heels and still manages to marvel at the fact that Zade is very tall. Apparently he's an Ali Hazelwood guy because he's like 6'6" or something crazy. Has this ever been mentioned before? No, I will want to be very clear. He's supposed to be like a spy, like he's supposed to be able to infiltrate places. He's 6'6", motherfucker, stands out like a goddamn sore thumb. You would spot a man that tall regardless of if you are a woman who likes tall men or not. Additionally, as a recovering tall man addict, I would like to see more representation of male body types in books. It's getting really tired of seeing just tall dudes with abs and everything. Just give me a dude who isn't 6'6" and like muscular. If you're a monster lover like me as well, I don't care. Make them 10 feet tall and physically impossible to take on. But in our traditional romance, can we get some representation of other body types, please? Not just for the women as well. Rant over. So at this sex party, Addie manages to once again showcase how dumb she is, because Addie is left alone for 0.5 seconds and manages to be in a locked room with the man who assaulted her. Also, by the way, not how sex parties work. So before the man is able to SA Addie again after realizing who she is, Zade runs in and rescues her once again. I just don't care if you want to showcase your character having a girl boss moment. If you let a traumatized person enter into, once again, a very common sense left the building situation, you're not a good writer. Like, this would not happen. Explain to me it like I'm a 2-year-old child. Don't actually, never mind, don't do that. But like, I don't get it. When your character's making Bella Swan look like a fucking genius, maybe you've gone down the wrong path. Now, there's a bunch more faffing about in the story. There's some sex scenes that honestly I skimmed. They were fine, I think. I didn't care for them at all. There was also just a lot more blood play that I wanted to read about, and I know that that's some people's thing, but it wasn't mine, and I have no interest in reading those scenes closer. There's also some random info dumping about the fact that Sydney and Sibby were probably related, and like, okay, great, cool, thanks. And then they do a reverse rendition of the culling where Francesco, Rocco, and the guy that was going to buy Addie, whose name is Xavier, by the way, have to run away, and then they go hunt them down. Because if anybody knows, if there was something done bad to you, you should do the bad thing to the person that did it to you, because that's how justice works, right? Don't get me wrong, I don't think traffickers should have the right to walk this earth, but I also don't think that hunting for support. Don't get me wrong, I don't think traffickers should have the right to walk this earth, but I also think hunting for sport is despicable, and just because the person has done bad things does not mean we get to do that to them as well. You know what I'm saying? Let's just bring back the guillotine and get it over with. You know, stop playing with your food is what I'm saying. So to move on to the next plot relevant thing, Zade goes on a TV show like Good Morning America and then pretends to be anonymous and basically confesses to murdering Xavier, who is apparently, once again, such a well-known figure. People know of him, but also you can't track who's being trafficked or anything like that. Like, so fucking stupid. Zade is also a character that's like, he is so smart. Oh my god, he's ridiculously cool. And I'm like, he just admitted on live TV that he murdered somebody and there are no fucking consequences. How is this not causing people to go, no, that doesn't make any sense? What the heck? On top of being so smart and so hot and so sexy and 6'6", he can also cook mac and cheese and steaks, and I'm sure his penis is huge. Then there's a 9th act breakup where Zaddy fights. I can't believe I just came up with that ship nickname. So Zaddy fight because Addie's mom got shot, and Zade is like, it's not my fault your mother got shot. And Addie's like, no, I'm pretty sure it's your fault. I don't know why else she would have gotten shot in this situation. And Zade basically gaslights the fuck out of her, being like, yeah, nope. That would have happened regardless if I was in your life or not. And I'm like, no, he's Christian Grey turned vigilante. This man is the reason we're in the bad place. And if this wasn't exasperating enough, Zade tells Addie he removed her IUD when she was sleeping. What you said? But he was just goofing. That didn't happen. He didn't do that, did he? I have no idea, actually. Maybe he is not a good person. So after this situation, she breaks up with him. And then they get back together like 0.5 seconds later. Because Girly cannot exist without this man. And making him an actual bad guy would somehow... I don't know. How did we get here? And then they find Claire. If you don't remember Claire, that's okay. She's not really that important other than the fact that she controls the whole government. Yep. One person, this lady. She's also on the island. And she thinks Zade is hot. I don't know what's going on with this power couple, but they're literally so attractive that everyone around them faints with desire. Zade hits Claire with a lay it on me and a better make it good for her proposition. And this is where things got real weird. And that's already weirder than things have been, by the way. Like, you might be saying, Maddie, things are already weird. How could you possibly make it weirder? Well, you'll never guess the things that come out of Claire's mouth in this scene. That is like 4% before the end of the actual fucking book. Claire, the antagonist, tells Zade that she wants to use his technology to mind control the population of the United States. I don't know what Zade gets out of this situation, to be honest. To which Addie's internal monologue, and I'll read it directly, says this: some new world order shit that seems so far outside the realm of possibility, people turn it into fiction for entertainment. I've literally written books like this myself. Now, I don't know if you caught the new world order part of that, but this just got a little too space lasery for me, if you catch what I'm picking up on. I don't disbelieve that there are problems with the rich in America. That is a very concernable factoid about this here country. And I mean United States when I say America, by the way. But the fact that in this book that could have been edited to avoid referencing conspiracy theories, there's one right here. And bear in mind, we've never seen Addie talk about her books. And I am now incredibly curious as to what she wrote about. So there's that. It just mind boggles me so much that this character hasn't been that important. And this comes 97% of the way through the book. And we had to drive home that she is absolutely so fucking evil. She is literally Bond villain evil and is asking the hero to help her mind control the population. What? But just in case Claire was getting too big for her britches, Addie lays down the law. Zade is God, and the only one who will conquer this world is him. Ball is life. Ball is God. Zade is God. Oh my god, it's so stupid. We'll be unpacking the god shit here later. Yeah, that's the book. Next couple of scenes is a weird scene where Addie's mom has a boyfriend, but I thought she was still married to Addie's dad. Apparently not. And then Sibby runs off with the boyfriend, who is not a boyfriend, and then Zade proposed to Addie after they do bud stuff for the first time. Wild. That's the plot of Hunting Adeline. No skips. Completely full of bangers. There is a lot to unpack here, as you can probably tell. So I'm going to condense down as much as possible to try and kind of get my thoughts out so that we're not here forever discussing this book that I think is, for mostly, just kind of silly, to be honest, but it's handling really extreme topics and manages to make me completely fucking irrationally angry. All right, apologies for the aggressive lighting change. I went and touched grass like I had literally said in my script, so let's just jump right into it, shall we? Alrighty, so part 2, we're going to go ahead and discuss the elements of the story within Hunting Adeline. And I'm going to start off with the concept of book banning, BDSM, and purity culture, oh my. Despite my aggressive tone throughout the entirety of the first part of this video, I don't think this book should be banned. I do not think that banning books is the answer when it comes to situations like this, but I do think that there is a conversation to be had about the popularity of this series versus the content of said series. The average reader will probably read this and go, huh, that was wild, what a crazy time, and not actually imbibe much content from this book or much narrative from this book. But there are the few who, like on Book Talk, are doing things like romanticizing a serial killer right now because he has face tattoos and looks like the Joker from the bad Suicide Squad movie. And additionally, also fully grown women recommended this series to a minor. And that's where the concept of boundaries that this book does not have has already bled into the readers that are idolicizing this series in a way that I'm just so uncomfortable with. This running theme in books like this, where the dangerous man is toxic and dangerous to everyone but you, ooh woo, is just not actually a good thing, and it's super harmful and unsettling in the grander scope of the world at large. Considering the general political climate that we're in right now, romanticizing oppression and an oppressor, and a violent one at that, is just wild to me if you think about it. On top of that, I have seen like 3 Draco Hermione fanfictions getting picked up for TradPub, and that is if we're being honest, a Nazi ex-Holocaust survivor, technically speaking, especially like Manacled. Like, there is so many things that I'm just a little bit unnerved by publishing trends right now, and this book is one of them, and I still think it's so interesting that this book has not been picked up by a traditional publisher at this point, because traditional publishers are just throwing money at anyone who has even an iota of Book Talk pull, and this book has that, and it hasn't been picked up yet. And there has to be a reason why. I'm not saying it should be banned. I'm just saying it's very interesting the way things are going in the publishing industry, and I think you should be very mindful of what you spend your money on at this point. On to the first element that I want to talk about in this book. Religion. Not exactly a small segment, to be honest. The religion in this book was something that I found very weird. I don't recall this being at all prevalent in the first book. The first book seemed to take place in like maybe just a very odd reality, whereas this book fully takes place in La La Land. Like, it is very wild how detached from reality this book seems to be, while also still trying to be relevant and have like a moralistic point, I guess. Early on in this sequel, Addie says, after she's been kidnapped and had been in a horrific car accident, that she doesn't deserve to be in this situation. She deserves to be in heaven because she's a good person. Which, like, okay, love the confidence, but I don't agree with that fact. She has done nothing in my eyes, especially in the last book, that made her an astoundingly good person. And bear in mind, I'm not religious, and honestly, a lot of this book made me so thankful that I've been an atheist for a very, 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 very long time. But the way that Addie's entitlement to being someone who would be going to proverbial heaven is a very strange situation, because she's been doing bad things, and she does a bunch of bad things throughout the course of this book, because as she's decided, her religion is now tied to the person that she is in a romantic relationship with. Something about tan skin covered in black tattoos. Jesus Christ. Thank you, she-devil, for inventing a man like Zade. The combo of Jesus Christ and then she-devil is another weird, not making sense like comparison. Like, even in the same sentence, we are getting conflicting messages about what the point of this book is and what it's trying to do. Are we thinking Jesus, or are we thinking a she-devil? Because those are not the same thing. The story progresses and Addie becomes more and more entrenched in her attachment to Zade. He goes from being this Batman level figure to being a god. He starts taking on this like Hades role because he's the bad guy, which is weird because that's not that's not who Hades is in the like mythology, and it's always interesting to me when dark romance girlies or romantasy in general don't know anything about actually anything. But that's a whole other video. As I was saying, there doesn't seem to be a clear religion that this is ascribing to or trying to use the motifs, typically speaking. There's references to Hail Marys, some Christian Catholic routines, but none of it really makes any cohesive sense put together. And honestly, when the Hades Persephone shit started coming in, it just became cringy so fast. I know that like me harping on how you viewing your partner as like an all-powerful being and that being bad, it might seem a little obvious to some people, but like I just feel like this is something that if a younger person got a hold of this and started ascribing some of these ideologies towards their partner, there is a clear issue with what we would obviously end up with, a la people thinking a serial killer is hot. With that being said, since religion is such a hot topic, I'm not necessarily going to dive fully headfirst into all of the issues that I have with this book and the way that the author is presenting herself publicly, but I will just put this to the class. Considering the political climate and the fact that I am not the person that you should be accessing for any kind of information on political issues right now, I'm going to be very cautious when I point out the fact that this author has some very odd things that she does, putting them into her book, as well as what she supports publicly. And I find it very odd that there has, from what I can tell, been no retraction on H.D. Carlton's part for what she has put into these books and the anti-Semitism of a lot of what has been included. Whereas her as a public figure, I don't think she supported any other cause than pro-Palestine, which I will have links down below for helping families in Gaza right now, because that is something that I care for deeply. But I just think that there is correlation between this book not being picked up by any trad pubs and the intense conspiracy theories that seem to have at least influenced the storyline. And I can't speak to any public opinion on what H.D. Carlton's got going on with that, and I don't want to. This book in this situation makes me feel really gross. So I'm going to leave that at that, and I'm going to move on. Context is everything in this situation, so please don't use my video as a resource on world topics right now. Please go educate yourself. Don't leave it in my comment section. Thank you. We got to talk about Rio. On another hot topic item, the character I didn't talk about in my plot breakdown is Rio. He is a Puerto Rican man. He is the only person that is signified as being a person of color. And oh my God, the author never lets you forget that this man is Puerto Rican. Holy shit. Every other word out of his mouth is some very appropriated phrase in Spanish. So Rio's character line in the story is that he's part of the group that kidnaps Addie. He ends up having this more platonic, friendly relationship with her, even though he's around her when all of this abuse is happening to her. She does come to find out that he's only doing this because these people have captured his sister and that she's in a grooming house, which, once again, I don't think that's the terminology and it just feels uncomfortable, but we're not going to unpack that. But after Rio helps Addie escape, this is where the reaching happens and the retconning of someone's entire character arc happens when they are literally off page, and I don't think he even comes back into the storyline unless he says goodbye to Addie and his sister. He helped her get kidnapped. He helped her escape. There was some character growth within that. Afterwards, we find out that he has been trying to help as much as possible, but he can't because of his sister. And on top of that, Francesca has been assaulting him. Because just like in Sarah J. Maas's world, where if a bad guy has been a bad guy, the only way to make him not be a bad guy anymore is have a woman assault him. This is the same thing. Like, the only way to make a man a good guy again is to have him go through the same thing that the female characters have gone through, but have it be at the hands of a female. Like, it's a very strange mental gymnastic, as I was saying before, that just doesn't really fit with anything to do with the character line, because we didn't have any setup for it. Francesca and Rio, to my knowledge, barely interact in the house, and if they do, Francesca's just yelling at him. It was never established that they had anything going on, and to do this mental work to just be like, oh yeah, this character and this character were bumping uglies and it wasn't consensual because I said so, is just not good writing. Goes down to the very rote writing tactic of tell not show, whereas this book is just telling you need to feel sorry for this man because Zade will kill him if he gets his hands on him, but you need to feel bad about this person who, bear in mind, is still working for traffickers. Like, the things that he does, they don't get an excuse because of some bad shit that happened to him as well. Just like the fact that Addie and Zade do bad shit to each other and to others, and just because they're the good guys doesn't mean they get a place in heaven. You know what I'm saying? This constant need to create victimhood in men to exonerate them from bad acts, like, oh, he's got a dark history, that's why he's mean to me. I'm sorry, I don't care. If someone's been traumatized, if they are then using that trauma as an excuse to then traumatize other people, that still makes them a bad person. On top of all of the other things wrong with this series, there also doesn't seem to be the awareness that men and boys can be trafficked as well. And even on that note, the homosexual characters in this story are used as kind of just like a stand-in. There's even this really weird random segment where Addie notices a very visibly queer person walking down the street in Seattle, and she goes, Seattle, which, albeit, that is something that happens in that area, but to call it out like that feels voyeuristic almost in a way, because like that person's just minding their business, and I can bet you money when the author was in Seattle, this just occurred to them, so they wrote it into the story. Like, tell me you haven't really lived in the area you're writing about by being weird about a person who's just living their life and being different. Like, the fuck is wrong with you? To Rio, we basically end up writing off his character because he deserves to live because he helped Addie and was victimized. That's it. On to yet another topic that's going to make everybody so happy that I'm talking about it. Fatphobia. This book is rife with it. And I find it interesting because the author seems to be clearly in support of body positivity, but in a way that doesn't seem to be doing what she wants it to be doing. Because all of the characters who are plus size or fat in this book equal evil. Rocco is big. He is evil. There are no other listed people in this series that are plus size. And then on top of that, Francesca, who is super evil, is the foil to Rocco. She is stick thin in a way that's almost used to be a form of self-hatred. And she's basically attributed this kind of nonsense of like, well, she must hate fat people so much so that she's become thin. And that means the main character gets to hate her as well because she was going to be fat if she hadn't forced herself to be skinny. Once again, this happens a lot with writers that haven't done enough work to realize their own biases. When you're writing in something relevant like fatphobia, like the word is dropped into the story and it's attacked by the author, but then you're not doing anything to recognize the fact that the only character you have included that is on the page larger than the rest of everybody else is evil. You haven't done the work to actually accept the thing that you say that you've accepted. This goes hands in hand with any physical deformity, especially teeth. For some reason, the people who are coded as bad in this story have fucked up teeth. And it's so frustrating to me that, like, not being able to access dental care in this country doesn't mean that you are inherently a bad person. It's just something that some people struggle with. And I think that having that kind of shame, even in a book like this, is so frustrating to me. It can be expensive. It can be hard to even get around to when you have mental health problems. And as we've seen, mental health problems are not handled very well in this story. So see Sibby for that. Speaking of mental health problems, let's talk about mommy issues. This book has a mommy issues problem that derails the plot line out of fucking nowhere. This was something that came up a little bit in the first book, and I feel like it made more sense then. But if you're going to have a storyline that revolves around a person getting kidnapped and her family comes to support her and help her through it, that means the real world knows about it. So why on earth did her family members not call the cops? I don't get it. My mom hates me, she starts. Or maybe she doesn't hate me, but she's never liked me. I think it's because she never understood me. My mom is all about being prim, proper, and classy, enter beauty pageants, marry a rich man, and live lavishly. I think she just wanted me to have the life she couldn't have, and when I did the opposite, she resented me for it. Once again, this doesn't make a lot of sense because I don't recall anything really about Addie's mom in the first book. I thought it was petulant at best for an adult to be talking about their parent like this in just a general book. Like it literally sounds like a teenager having a tantrum about their parent, but we're supposed to believe that Addie and her mother have a relationship. The way that this is handled clearly indicates to me that someone needs therapy, and we shouldn't be reading this. There should be an honest conversation happening between somebody before this was put into the page. Like, because it just doesn't make sense for the story, contextually. There is no reason this becomes a conflict. At first, Addie's mother is like, hey, I don't think you should be dating that guy. He got you kidnapped. And Addie is like, I don't care what you say, bitch. And that's it. That's literally the whole part of it, until Claire ends up attacking Addie's parents, and Addie's mom gets shot. Like, here's the thing. I'm fully 30, and I know for a fact that if my parents found out that I was kidnapped, abused, any of the above, because of the relationship I was in, I would be sent off to Siberia with a swiftness. To be honest, this book managed to make the Den of Vipers plotline of her dad selling her to the mob more realistic than Addie's mother going, oh, I got shot, but Zade's a cool dude, so you can date him. That's wild. That's so stupid. There's also this random part at the end of the book where Addie comes to her mom and she has this weird condescending tone with literally every female character, especially her mother, where she was like, oh, my mom has a new hot boyfriend. I didn't think she was a freak like that. Like, Addie, you're not even that freaky. Calm down. Like, you ended up getting proposed to after having anal for the first time. I'm sorry, that's just really... That was so mind-blowing. You decided to marry the criminal. Because the fact that Dark Romance Girlies will probably be very excited and want to talk about all of the things in this video, I will most likely be doing more dark romance videos in the future. I want to post every single Sunday. We'll see if that happens. But if you like this video, definitely check out my other platforms, including my Instagram, TikTok, and Threads. It feels weird to say Threads. Also have a Patreon where I have been posting monthly reading vlogs, specifically on books that I'm going to either rant about or just extra content like that. I have a reading vlog for this book as well, where I basically lose my mind while reading said book. There is a Discord where I like to chat with people about my videos. If you have thoughts, please definitely pop on in there. I am going to go now. Like, subscribe, all the good stuff. Bye. Also, remember to drink water and be kind to yourself. And remember that you are, in fact, a bad bitch.